we did have a much smaller room, so hopefully enjoy the actual seats and not standing room only. But this is the first conference meeting to kick off, and what we typically do, Madam Chair, is I'll just probably have Eddie kind of go through the different provisions. He's prepared a sheet here of all of the conferenceable items, and I'll probably just have him go through that. Currently, just for everyone's information, we have House Bill 2036 and House Bill 2465 in conference. Either we have a couple of bills with about 30 different provisions, or we will be getting some more shells. It's my anticipation that we can kind of take a look at these, start building some buckets or silos that we can put some of these pieces in anticipation that hopefully we can get a few more bills to conference on and put these bills in. But with that, I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And do you want me to start with the two that are the two larger tax plans, or start with the one that's the list of kind of all others?
Madam Chair, do you have a preference? Okay. Why don't we start on the individual items, kind of the comprehensive list.
All right. So everybody should have two sheets from our office. One is portrait-oriented and one is landscape-oriented. The landscape-oriented just compares Senate Bill 539 and House substitute for Senate Bill 300. The other one has basically everything else is how I would term it. And so this other one is organized into three sessions. The first of those are Senate conferenceable provisions from this year other than 539. The second is House conferenceable provisions from this year other than 300. And then the last is the conferenceable items from last year that aren't either in 539 or 300 or in the Senate or House sections from this year, or have been otherwise enacted into law from some other bill. So that's kind of the organization of this sheet. I'll start with the Senate items. The first of those, the Senate passed HB 465. The Senate version of that included 6 provisions, some SALT Parity Act cleanup language, some disallowed business interest subtraction modification cleanup language, a subtraction modification for certain net operating losses related to federal tax law changes, employment credit disallowances related to the Internal Revenue Code Section 280C. We currently have a subtraction modification for certain ones of those, but it's somewhat outdated, and this basically pulls that up to the current Section 280C disallowances. The employee retention credit disallowance provision, that is similar to the 280C provisions, except that is a credit that was specific to some of the COVID-19 pandemic relief legislation, and it doesn't actually appear in Section 280C. And then an expansion of the homestead refund that was a tax freeze style refund, and a renaming of that to the Golden Years Homestead refund. Those are the 6 provisions of 2465. Next, the Senate passed substitute for Senate Bill 60. That is a sales tax oriented bill. It includes first a back to school sales tax holiday, and then it includes what I believe are 8 sales tax exemptions, one for menstrual discharge collection devices, one for diapers, one for custom meat processing services, one for the state schools for the deaf and the blind habitation facilities, one for the Johnson County Christmas Bureau Association, one for Doorstep Inc., one for Exploration Place, one for the Kansas Children's Discovery Center. Next, the Senate passed Senate substitute for House Bill 2036. That was a disabled veterans sales tax exemption. The Senate passed Senate Bill 484. That is property tax exemption for certain personal property. It's broadly speaking ATVs, certain trailers, certain watercraft, and then I put et cetera. It's a lot of the things that fall into the not elsewhere classified subclass. It's not the entirety of that subclass. Next is an extension of the single city port authority tax credit in Senate Bill 376. Next, in Senate Bill 480, provision authorizing teleconferencing for the Board of Tax Appeals small claims and expedited hearings divisions. Next is Senate Bill 311, which for purposes of the of property valuation, it excludes 3 categories of sales from that which can be considered valid sales. Those that are done under Section 1031 exchanges pursuant to the federal tax code, build to suit arrangements, and sale leaseback arrangements. Next is Senate Bill 498. It contains kind of 2 provisions. The first of those is the adoption tax credit changes, and the second of those is the Pregnancy Resource Act, which includes both a tax credit for contributions as well as a sales tax exemption for those facilities. And then finally is Senate Bill 482, which includes 4 changes to the revenue neutral rate process. The first of those changes is that it exempts the mailing requirement to exempt property owners. The second is that it requires the governing body vote to be on the same day as the commencement of the hearing. The third is that it provides an exception to the process in cases where the final valuation for the taxing entity is lower than that which was used to establish the revenue neutral rate. They could then adopt a rate that would go up to basically what the revenue neutral rate would have been were the final valuation, the valuation that was used in determining the revenue neutral rate. And the final one is statutory changes to the required notice form. We have in law a current set of statutory requirements. This would replace those with a new set. This is either similar or identical to that which was part of one of your packages last year. And that is the Senate items from this year. That might be a good place to pause for questions on those, or I'm happy to jump right on into the House items if that would be the will of the conference committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Eddie. I don't have any questions at this time. Do you? Okay, thank you.
Eddie, I just want to go back up to the House Bill 2465, the IRC Section 280C. Was that similar to what was in Senate Bill 8 last year?
I believe it is similar to it. I don't believe it is identical. I believe this broadens it out to capture. I believe it just links the Kansas subtraction modification to the disallowances specifically provided in 280C. The current Kansas subtraction modification lists specific tax credits. Some of those are now defunct. Some of those are still in place at the federal level but aren't used in Kansas, and some are used in Kansas. What you had last year would have just pulled specific additional credits into that subtraction modification. This just makes it a blanket. Whatever is in 280C is now under the umbrella of the Kansas subtraction modification. So it does still capture what we captured last year, but also captures everything.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, we did that so that we wouldn't be chasing federal language in the future is why we did it. But I would also have you clarify on the difference of the percentages. I think there's percentage difference from CCR 8 to, yes. And so therefore the fiscal might be a little different too.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. I believe the provision in Senate Bill, in the CCR for Senate Bill 8 last year limited those to, I think, 25% of the amounts for certain ones of those. And I believe the version of that we have in 2465 does not have any sort of limitation. So it's whatever the actual disallowed expense is would then be allowed as a subtraction modification.
Okay, and then I'm assuming, looking at the fiscal note on that piece, is it retroactive back to what year?
That is a good question. I'm trying to pull that up in 2465. Amelia may have that handy.
Mr. Chairman, the provision relating to the 280C subsection A disallowances is retroactive to tax year 2022.
Okay,
And then the federal employee retention credit disallowance goes back to 2020.
okay, that's the one. I was actually off a line when I was looking at the 40.4. That was the ERTC. Thank you.
And it might be worth clarifying also that it is just subsection A of IRC section 280C. That is the subsection that relates specifically to these employment-oriented tax credits. There are other subsections of that section that do various other things, but this
Okay.
focuses on the employment-oriented credits.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to study up on that one a little bit. Moving down, the other one I had was Senate Bill 376, the Single City Port Authority. Is that just an extension of what we currently have in statute? Is that I missed if you said it, was that a 5-year extension or a 4-year or?
I believe it is a 5-year, and that's why that fiscal impact doesn't actually kick in until fiscal '26, is that under current law, that's good through '24, tax year '24, which is of course fiscal '25 for purposes of that. I believe that's an additional 5 years, and glancing down at Amelia in case she has it open ahead of me, but I believe it is.
Mr. Chairman, it is an extension from 2024 to 2029.
Okay, thank you for that. I think looking at these other provisions, that's all I had. Members of the House, did you have any questions or anything? Okay, seeing no further questions, we can continue.
All right, the House had 4 bills on its conferenceable items list other than the contents of House Substitute for Senate Bill 300. First of those is, I put down 2609, I believe it's actually substitute for 2609, and that provides for uniformity to the property tax exemptions as they relate to electric generation facilities. I believe that bill started out as 2609, just extending a couple of those, and the committee adopted a substitute bill to provide a uniform 10-year exemption approach. The next of those is House Bill 2757, which provides for adoption savings accounts and is modeled after the first-time homebuyer savings accounts legislation from a couple of years ago. The next is House Bill 2819, which provides for sales tax. I put sales tax authority on both of these next two. Probably sales tax election authority is the right way to phrase it, though. It authorizes an election in those 2 counties to adopt a sales tax. Rawlins County is 2819, and then House Bill 2828 provides the same for Marshall County. So I'd stand for questions on the House items.
So thank you, Eddie and Mr. Chairman. We do have a question on that once we begin negotiating. I know we had a bill that was on the consent calendar for Neosho County, and I'm hoping that we can bring that legislation into consideration in the conference committee. Yes, it was Senate Bill 537.
Well, Madam Chair, I think you know my position on this. I think it's kind of ridiculous. We have to approve the authority to even have a vote. I think we need to listen to the people. So I'll certainly be willing to consider that when the time comes.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the senators? See none. Okay. Please continue, Eddie.
All right, the last section on this is conferenceable items from 2023, which of course aren't listed above or elsewhere or otherwise enacted. The first of those is some of the provisions from Senate Bill 8. Of course, some of the provisions of Senate Bill 8 either are listed above or have been otherwise enacted or included elsewhere. So these are just those that haven't found a different landing place. There were certain personal property filing changes that reduced some penalties and provided for a once-for-all filing. Agritourism land classification, I put changes, specification might be a better word there, that it would provide for it to be classified as agricultural land for property tax purposes. The third was the property tax exemption provisions for entities with which government entities compete. The fourth was a change to the revenue neutral rate law. It provided for an extension of the printing and postage reimbursement that the state has provided the last 2 years to the counties on that. The next was a provision which provided for additional years worth of information to be required on the annual property valuation notice that is mailed out. The next would have codified the agricultural land adverse influences, which are currently provided for in administrative guidance from the Property Valuation Division. The next would have been a sales tax exemption for certain telecommunications infrastructure purchases. The next would have been, I have it labeled a sales tax exemption for manufacturers' coupons. It's technically an exclusion from the sales price, but I think in terms of the actual impact on the consumer, it's the same as a sales tax exemption. And then the last item there would be withholding tax penalty reductions. The next item from last year that is still on the list are two provisions that were a part of the Senate version of House Bill 2002. House Bill 2002 itself, of course, has been enacted into law, but these were in the Senate version of that and were not included elsewhere. They relate to certain residential real property valuation appeals and which appraisals, or rather which appraisers can provide information in those that is currently allowed for general appraisers, and this would extend it to residential appraisers. The next would be the repeal of a prohibition that a taxpayer cannot currently use the payment under protest appeal procedure when they have already used the equalization appeal procedure in the spring. Next is the House version of House Bill 2036, which provides for property tax exemptions for certain disabled veterans. And then the final item on this list is House Bill 2229, which provides for a sales tax deduction on certain motor vehicle transactions when there is not a trade-in, but the sale does not occur simultaneously. And that is everything that I have listed here. Of course, this is probably the best time to mention this. Sometimes there are tax bills that work their way through other committees that you all want included in your conference list. If there are any of those that you want included, I'd be happy to add them to this list. Just let me know for future meetings.
So Eddie, if there are other tax bills out there, we keep hearing, oh, the fiscal note, the fiscal note. So it would be nice to keep track of any other tax bills that are in other committees. Not so much to conference on, but just to know where we are fiscally.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very wise comment, because as tax committees, we're very aware of what the total fiscal cost is, and then there's other work in other committees that could be very impactful to that total dollar amount. So. Well, we can always come back to it if you. I'm a little absent-minded usually myself, and I think of a question, I don't write it down. But if there are no further questions on this, we might move on to the second page, Eddie.
Sure. The second page is a comparison between the two chambers' most recent kind of larger tax packages, House substitute for Senate Bill 300 on the House side and Senate Bill 539 on the Senate side. I'll start with House substitute for Senate Bill 300. It includes, it looks like essentially 7 provisions. It would provide first for kind of restructuring of the individual income tax brackets and rates to provide for a 0% rate for income from 0 to 7,000 for single filers, a 5.2% rate for income from 7,000 to 30,000 for single filers, and a 5.65% rate for income from $30,001 and above. All of those thresholds are doubled for married couples filing joint returns. Second provision is increases to the standard deduction and personal exemption amounts and cost of living adjustments to those amounts. It would provide for the standard deduction amounts to be increased by 3%. It's from $3,500 to $3,605 for singles, $8,000 to $8,240 for married couples, and $6,000 to $6,180 for head of household filing statuses. The personal exemption amount would also be increased by 3% from $2,250 to $2,320. Both the standard deduction and personal exemption amounts would then be indexed pursuant to the Section 1F3 Internal Revenue Code indexing formula, which is just kind of a general inflationary cost of living adjustment for tax years 25 and 26. That 26 amount would then be frozen indefinitely in the statutes until the legislature further acts upon it at that point in time. Those three provisions are summed together in this fiscal table on that top line. The next item is an exemption for Social Security benefits from the state income tax. I don't think I need to say too much more about that. As everybody's looked at it all year long, it's effective in tax year 2024. You can see that on the next line down. The next is rate reductions to the financial institutions privilege tax rates. The House version of this is kind of the way a one-step approach is maybe how I would describe it. It does what last year you looked at as two separate steps of rate reductions. It does both of those steps in tax year 2025. The next provision is the food sales tax rate being reduced to 0% effective July 1, and the state highway fund percent adjusted to 18% on that same date. Those are both currently provided to take effect on January 1 of 2025. The final provision in the House bill is kind of all rolled together in one, the final one that is listed here is all rolled together in one item, and that is reductions to the state finance mill levy to 18 mills and an increase in the residential exemption amount to $100,000, and those would both be effective tax year 2024, and it would actually then discontinue the formula that is in current law that provides for increases to that exempt amount in future years. In conjunction with that, there is a demand transfer to be made from the state general fund to the school district finance fund, and that is linked to if the residential exemption amount were $42,049 and the mill levy was 20 mills. And the director of the budget certifies the amount that the property tax would have generated in that scenario, and that amount is then transferred from the state general fund to the school district finance fund. And so you can see on this table, there's a set of negative numbers in the $172 to $194 million range, and then they're positive down below in the state school district finance fund. And then the other thing that the House substitute for Senate Bill 300 doesn't actually appear on this table because we've kind of been handling this separately from the tax provisions, is that it reinstates effective for 2025 the transfer from the state general fund to the special city county highway fund, which is based upon the state general fund receipts from motor carrier property taxes and commercial vehicle fees. And then it also abolishes the local ad valorem tax reduction fund and the county and city revenue sharing fund and eliminates the statutory transfers from the SGF to those funds. And that is the provisions of SB 300. I would maybe pause there for questions on that bill.
Thanks, Eddie. Would you, going back to that last point, would you kind of briefly, first of all, did you say the fiscal total on that highway fund? I think it's about 11.5.
Yeah, that transfer is anticipated to be about $11.5 million per year going forward.
And do you want to explain a little bit more in detail why that's not included on this sheet?
Yeah, our office has struggled for the entirety of this session in terms of how to portray those transfer amounts because, of course, they haven't happened in many years. And so most of the time when people look at state general fund profiles for our office, they have us go ahead and just continue not doing those. And so we thought it was potentially imprudent to include those in the tables like this because of the fact that in our SGF profiles, they're typically already backed out unless we are told to include them. And so we've just been describing those kind of in narrative terms in terms of what the impact of those would be. Of course, under current law, all three of those transfers are scheduled to resume in fiscal year 2026. And so that is, if the legislature took absolutely no action in either a tax bill or a budget bill to do anything to the sections providing for those transfers, the $11.5 million transfer would resume in 26. The $54 million transfer to the local ad valorem tax reduction fund would resume in 2026, and the transfer to the county and city revenue sharing fund, which is a little over $100 million per year, would also resume in 2026. And so that's kind of the lay of the land on those transfers as they stand right now, and why we've tried to just describe those in narrative terms rather than folding them into the specific tables.
Right, and I know that's one of the things, I don't serve on appropriations, but I love kind of diving into the budget. And I've always wondered on those profiles where we do have those provisos in there that kind of expire that, but those aren't really ever built into those project or those budget runs because they have not been funded, and we're just anticipating, even though law says they are funded, we're kind of pulling them out of that equation on the budget profile.
Yeah, that's actually most frequently our first question when somebody tells us they want a SGF profile is, what do you want to do with the local government transfers? After they've described, of course, their changes they want to the profile. Yeah.
Madam Chair, any questions or discussion on this?
I don't think so. I think we're good. We've looked at it pretty closely. It's nice to have the comparison between the two.
Well, and I think one thing this shows is we're not that far apart on a lot of these things. So I don't know, I guess at this point, we don't know how many different shells or bills that we will have in conference. It's kind of my hope. I know we've set some records here in the last few years on the number of bills that we've bundled together. I would like to avoid that as much as possible, but we'll have to see what we get for vehicles. No pun intended. We have some vehicle tax stuff in here, but do you want to proceed with anything at this point, or do you want to wait and see what kind of bills that we have assigned to tax conference?
So I think I would ask a couple of questions of research so that when we come back, and one of them would be if we did change that number. I'm not going to negotiate. Oh, okay. No, I know you didn't. I figured you just didn't want to go over the Senate stuff.
I'm
so-
sorry. I am so sorry. No, absolutely. I wanted to dive into that.
Yeah,
I apologize.
But I do have a couple of questions that we could
Okay.
ask them after we go over this, just to get some numbers so that when we come back, we have a better idea of where we want to land, if that's
Certainly.
okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, yeah, I'll go ahead and do 539 as well. 539 has provides for a single rate income tax plan. The rate for tax year 24 is 5.7%, and then it steps down by 1/20% per year to where it lands at 5.45% in tax year 2029 and all years thereafter. It does provide increases to the personal exemption amounts and kind of a change to the way Kansas does personal exemption amounts in recent years to maybe more akin to how we did them in the very earliest days of the income tax. The personal exemption amounts are currently set at $2,250 for everyone that you get to claim the same personal exemption amount at the federal level. This would increase that amount to $22,000 for married couples filing joint returns, $11,000 for all other filers, and then for each dependent listed on the return, an additional $3,000. It would also increase the single filer standard deduction amount from $3,500 to $4,000. All of that would be effective for tax year 2024. Beginning in tax year 2025, the standard deduction and personal exemption allowance amounts would all be annually increased using the Federal Internal Revenue Code indexing formula. So that is those three provisions kind of combined, or that top line. The next line is the Social Security exemption. It's identical to the House substitute for Senate Bill 300 provision. The next line is the privilege tax rate reductions. I'm going to draw your attention here to the numbers. I mentioned that the House kind of had a one-step in tax year 25. The reason for the slightly different numbers here is the Senate actually has a two-step rate reduction. The first step occurring in 2025 and the second step occurring in 2026. The next is the acceleration of the food sales tax to zero. That is the same for the House and the Senate. The Senate does not have the school district finance fund demand transfer, so that's why that section is grayed out, and this provides a good opportunity to mention the gray out of the Senate Bill 300 on the child tax credit is because the House did not have a child tax credit, which is the next provision on Senate Bill 539 is the creation of a child tax credit. It is begins at $600 per qualifying child based upon the Kansas adjusted gross income of the taxpayer, and then it staggers downwards to $25 for higher income Kansans, and those amounts are increased. It is only available for children under the age of 5 years at the end of the tax year.
Did you say 5? I thought it was 0 to 4 in that bill.
I said under the age of 5, so that would be
Okay.
0 to 4.
Okay, and it is refundable.
Yes, that's a
Okay.
refundable tax
Thank
credit.
you.
The next provision dropping down is the Senate's position on the school finance mill levy exemption, and that is to increase it to $100,000 in fiscal year 2020, in tax year 2024, and then to have the formula that currently provides for those annual increases to then resume taking effect in tax year 2025. And I believe that is the entirety of the contents on 539. I stand for questions there.
Thanks. Eddie, I'm a little rusty on my IRS 1040. When you claim your personal exemptions at the federal level, I'm assuming that flows through to what you claim at the state level as well. I mean, we don't really have a personal exemption, or I should say deductions. We don't really have a personal exemption anymore at the federal level since they increased the standard deduction. How would that tie into our state code at the moment?
So the standard deduction, itemized deductions, and personal exemptions are all downstream from the federal adjusted gross income, which is, of course, our state starting point for individual income taxes. And so the amounts are immaterial, the federal amounts relative to the state amounts. The way the state code is written, it's whatever you're allowed to take an allowance for at the federal level. The way the federal law is actually written under the 2017 tax bill is that the allowance is still written into the law, but it's specified to be $0 at the federal level. And so that's why we're able to still use that as kind of the piggybacking at the state level.
Okay, perfect. Is there any, because one of the things that came up when we were considering our last, I think it was House Bill 2284, when you look at the exemptions, this is a very rare, not a lot of people would be in this situation, but let's say you had a child or a dependent that was also earning income, whether it's a high schooler that was working or perhaps even a college student that was still claimed on their parents' forms. If the parent claims that child as an exemption, that child cannot claim an exemption on their tax return if they file separately?
So that's the way it works under the way at the federal level and the way Kansas currently has it structured. The changes in 539 reword the way that we provide for personal exemption amounts to where, in that instance, the child filing would get the single filer, assuming they are a single taxpayer, not a married couple in that instance, filing a joint return, would get the single filer personal exemption amount. And if the parent is still claiming them as a dependent, they would also be able to claim them as a dependent and get the exemption on the parent's return. So that particular taxpayer would in essence have a personal exemption twice, once on their own return and assuming they are a dependent still also as a dependent on their parent's return.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, yeah. I think you already answered the questions I had on the child tax credit, because that's one, we did have a hearing on a bill in House Tax Committee. I think it was pretty similar to, it sounds like what was placed in here. I think ours was 0 to 18, so that, because ours was a pretty large fiscal note. But I don't think I have any further questions. I'll see if any of my other House members have any questions. Okay. Nothing, okay. Okay, Now, with apology, Senator, I did not mean to skip over that. So at this point, how do you want to proceed?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go over that first page if we could and try to put together as much as we can. I know we get accused of bundling, but it does help to put provisions in a bill so that you know where you are fiscally. And it's so funny, I've asked several people, they don't want to be bundled, and I said, well, do you want yours taken out then? Oh, absolutely not. So I think that's kind of how it goes. But let's make an attempt and act like we have our wish list for how many vehicles. Would that be okay?
Okay. Yeah, I think looking through the list, I don't know if this would make sense, but if we can kind of keep things in sales tax together, property tax together, any income tax things together. I think I'm under the assumption that if we do the tax relief bill, that will probably stay all together in one bill, and then we'll have to have some other tax bills to put the rest of the contents in.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great idea. I think you and I had always done that until last year, and look what happened last year. If they would have just given us more vehicles, no, I'm kidding. But no, I think this will be great, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Okay. Do you want to go kind of through line item by line item, or what would be your preference? Obviously, we have several sales tax exemptions kind of at the top there.
Let's start, I think, income tax at the first provisions in 22, or 2465. Do you want to start with those?
Yes.
Okay, and create it, okay, that'd be great.
So it really looks like the SALT parity, the disallowed business interest, net operating loss, and then the section 280C, and then the ERTC disallowances, those would all fit into income tax provisions.
So the top five?
Yes, the
Okay.
top five there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Holland.
Here's is an income tax provision.
Okay.
That is technically income tax.
Oh, because it's a tax credit.
It
It's
is,
a rebate, it's an income tax rebate off your K-40.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's right.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, we do treat it like a property tax provision, though. I'd prefer it be in the property tax legislation, if
Yeah,
that's okay.
I would agree.
Okay, thank you. I understand, we understand it's income tax, but most people see it as a property tax provision.
Right. Okay, are there any other income tax pieces that you would like? Let's see here. Go ahead. Oh, I was moving down the line here, that the next one that would be the adoption tax credit changes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to keep all those in a life bill, if we would.
Oh, a standalone bill?
Yes.
Okay.
If that would be okay.
So all of Senate Bill 498?
Yes.
Okay. Would you consider the Port Authority to be an income or property tax piece? Is it a sales?
That's an income tax credit.
Put that in the income tax
Yeah, that'd be
category?
great.
Okay. And just for everyone's information, I don't think we're agreeing to the conference positions here. We're just trying to
For the clarification.
separate the different buckets.
I just thought that after you said that. Yes, we are not negotiating positions. We are just clarifying as to how we could break the packages up.
Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Otherwise, this would be a really quick committee. Okay. Anything else there that would be related to income tax? In that first section? House Bill 2757 and the House items, that's an adoption savings account. It is kind of an income tax credit piece. Is that included in the adoption tax credit changes? Because this is kind of a different program. It's very similar to the First Time Home Buyers Act, where you can put the savings away, income tax free, and then use that. I think it's different than what is included in Senate Bill 498.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is, I do not, let's hold that one and figure out, or do you have a preference which one it would go in?
It doesn't really matter to me. We could go ahead and include that in, if you wanted to include that into Senate Bill 498.
Okay, with the life
Right, that would be
provisions.
kind
I
of
think that would make sense.
similar, okay.
Yes, and we'll want to go over in detail that bill. I know the Senate made some changes, and there may be some questions on the language. So we
Okay.
want to make sure we get it right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
How would you like to handle, looking at that bottom section there, we get into the withholding tax penalty reductions,
Should be income.
income?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't you guys agree?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else that you'd put in income tax? Madam Chair, I think that probably covers all the income tax provisions. So if we want to go through property taxes, going back up to the top, we'd have golden years.
Then 44.
484, yes. Do you want to put all the, like the revenue neutral, the Board of Tax Appeals in property tax piece? Okay.
Yes, I think that would be best. Thank you.
Okay.
And the agritourism classification from last year.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yes. That was one of my top priorities this year.
And I know another priority might not seem much, but allowing those valuations, the property valuations, all of that,
Okay.
with that.
Yeah, 311 would be in property tax. House Bill 2609, that uniformity bill would be property tax.
Government competition.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, a lot of those pieces in Senate Bill 8 would probably fall under property tax until we get down to the sales tax exemptions.
Property tax over separate, like,
Do you want to use a microphone so people can hear you?
oh, I'm sorry.
We don't want them to think we're cutting them out of the process.
No, nobody's been cut out at all. Just on some of these like administrative like things, like under 42 of like the final valuation reduction exempts or just like types of notice administrative things we want to make improvements to the process itself as far as, protesting, whatever. Do you want to treat that as part of property taxes or just have like a separate administrative kind of category where you have that like in a fourth thing? That was just my question, how you want to handle that.
I don't think we'll get that many, if we have that many of vehicles, that would be fine, but I
Yeah.
don't think we're going to have that many available to us.
So I'm saying just we'll lump the administrative stuff in with all the.
In with the property tax.
My question.
Yeah, I think that's at this point, unless we do get some other bills, I'd love to get those, kind of the technical and administrative clarifications. I mean, those are kind of a slam dunk in my mind in some of those things, so if we do have the bills, I think we could look at maybe separating those out individually.
So like 482, doing back some of that to property tax.
Yes, I had everything up in 482 in property tax. Yeah, I apologize.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And then, so then looking down at Senate Bill 8, the second and third from the bottom, well, on the fourth from the bottom, those three would all be property tax. Then I think the rest of the things would be under sales tax. Madam Chair, I might ask, under the sales tax election authority bills, if we could get a separate vehicle kind of for some just administrative and technical, would you be opposed to putting those into that bill?
No, Mr. Chairman, if we can get that many, that would be great.
Actually, I don't know if there's a rule that allows for a conference committee consent calendar. No, I'm kidding. One can always hope. Okay. And then the sales tax exemption, or the sales tax pieces on that bottom category would have the telecommunications, manufacturer coupons, and the motor vehicle sales tax. Does that sound correct? Okay.
And then SB 60 would be all sales tax.
Yes. And Madam Chair, while we're going through those, we had several sales tax exemptions that we did pass out of the tax committee. They never went above the line, but I just wanted to make you aware that we might have a few requests to present to the Senate other than the list that you've provided here. But okay. So as it looks right now, we would have perhaps the need for 4 different bills if we want to have the adoption, the kind of the life bill standalone, and then we have a sales tax, property tax, and income tax.
Yeah, if we could get 5.
5 would be even better. Yeah, okay. Right, we'll need, yes, plus 1 for whatever the comprehensive plan is.
Right.
Yeah. So we'd need an additional 4 or 5 at least. Okay. I will visit with my leadership, and I'm sure you'll do the same and see what we can come up with as far as shells to get assigned. I know we're back on the floor at 2. I think you guys are as well. Do you want to come back after adjournment and see where we can land on some of these things and start some negotiations?
I would, Mr. Chairman. We do have a conflict with the Ag Committee again. They are meeting after second adjournment. And so should we try setting a time or just say half hour after adjournment, after second adjournment?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure what we have on our agenda at 2. It might go pretty quick. I'd be happy to say just 30 minutes after Ag Committee is recessed or.
Yeah, well, we're just trying to, in case you guys run over in agriculture. So 30 minutes after second adjournment then.
That sounds fine with me.
Okay, the chairman says he can do it. I trust him.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. I think this is a great progress. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, it's always good to get all the cards out in front of us on the table here and know what we have to work with, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Same here.
Just a second.
Could we have staff reorder that for us? Because I make sure, it looks, yeah, that'd be great.
If we did go down to the 25% on the ERTC, or the
Oh, yes.
ERTC,